I constantly feel like I'm still just trying to figure out, well, what do I really want to do? What do I really want to do?
Right.
Or how do I want to get closer to what expressing myself?
Right.
And I feel like I've always just been a late starter, really, with all of that. And in actually coming to the party of realizing, oh, wait, this is really about kind of like trying to find out more about myself, express myself, and open myself up. Because I think it's also easy to do this stuff and not show yourself. For many years, I've done things that are less personal. There's some aspect of myself that's coming out in them.
Sure.
But I think that's what every filmmaker is kind of working towards, is trying to get kind of closer to being in touch with themselves and maybe exposing themselves more. Because I haven't really done a lot of acting the last few years. I'm really trying to look at what's going to make me happy as a creative person. I do love acting, but honestly, I have to say, I really love directing. Then I'll go to the place of I love directing, but but if you love directing, you're not really challenging yourself. You're being too easy on yourself. Do the thing that's more scary to you.
Right.
And I think now,
is there a scary element to
acting? Yes, definitely.
Say more.
Well, you're so. The less I've acted over the last few years, the more I've appreciated as a director working with actors.
Right.
Maybe somehow watching the acting process from the outside and seeing how hard it is. And I guess working with actors who I think are really good and seeing what they put into it.
Are you comparing? Meaning, are you thinking I don't do that? You know what I mean? Is that
Yeah, well, yes, I'll always watch an actor and go, oh my God, he did that or she did that. It's wait, I never thought of oh wow, that's real commitment level. Or I never thought of approaching it that way. Or I also just see how hard the process is to put yourself out there as an actor. What a strange thing to do.
Right.
What a vulnerable thing.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you, because she knows a thing or two. And now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Rabbit Air. Rabbit Air was recommended to me by a doctor because of the chronic allergies that we have in my house. And Rabbit Air literally has changed my life and my children's life. And I could not be more excited to talk about Rabbit Air, including the beautiful design options that they now have available, including this cute orange design from their new Contemporary Artists series. How cool is that? It's like art, but it's also an award-winning air purifier. Rabbit Air is some of the best in the industry, with 6-stage HEPA filtration that can trap micron-sized particles like pollen, pet dander, PM 2.5, and other airborne pollutants to keep your air clean. Intertech Microbiology Laboratories' recent tests demonstrate that the Rabbit Air Purifier removes 99.9% of airborne E. coli, A. niger mold, and MS2 virus in just 60 minutes. Their A3 air purifier is highly customizable, featuring an interchangeable faceplate design, wall mount, and floor stand, and 4 custom filtration options like pet allergy for pet owners like me, or toxin absorber for VOCs. It comes with unique features like laser particle sensing, a mobile app, which is awesome, and an ultra-quiet design, which is also super important. Visit rabbitair.com or call them 24/7 to talk to Rabbit Air consultants. Don't forget to check out the new Contemporary Artist series. That's rabbitair.com. Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik, and welcome to my breakdown. This is the place where we break things down so you don't have to. Boy, am I sorry. And girl, am I sorry that Jonathan is not here today, because we have the amazing Ben Stiller in person. I've always wanted to meet this man, and to get to talk to him about the things that I get to talk to him about, I am speechless. So without further ado, we're going to talk to Ben Stiller about mental health, his parents, his marriage, COVID, being a filmmaker, there's so many things, meditation, just here's Ben Stiller on the breakdown. Ben Stiller, welcome to the breakdown. Break it down.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. It's very exciting to have someone here in person, because we started this podcast during COVID when nothing was in person.
Right.
And so you're one of a few.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Dustin Hoffman was here. Right?
Dustin sat in that very seat.
That's very exciting.
Matthew McConaughey zoomed in, but Ben Stiller is in person. That's what we like here.
Dustin is, I love Dustin.
He is lovable.
He's just a very warm person.
He is.
Yeah.
Which is a really good segue into the nightmare I had about this interview.
No, really?
So I had a dream that you did not want to sit at this desk. And instead, we had some like errand that you wanted me to run with you. But you were like, oh, but we can do the interview. I just need to do whatever else you were doing. But like, I couldn't get the voice memo to work. So like, I didn't know if we'd even have audio. So I conducted an entire interview in my nightmare that I wasn't even recording. It was very strange. You were quite surly. But I'm gonna say this. I don't think I've ever watched an interview that you've done, meaning I know your work.
Just stop.
I know your wife.
Stop it, Mayim.
No, but I didn't know what to expect.
I've had enough of this. Okay, no. I want to fulfill your dream. Can I just tell you my dream last night?
100%.
Okay, I had like the classic actor's nightmare last night, where I was on stage doing a play where I was sitting at a desk and I forgot my lines.
Oh.
And there was a restaurant off stage right that was making noise. So I made them stop the performance claiming that the noise was bothering me. But the real reason was because I didn't know my lines. And then I got Adam Driver to bring me the play from off stage and put it, and so I had it on the desk so I could cheat and read the lines during the
I mean, that's more than like just a classic actor's dream. That's also a classic like Neurotics 101 dream.
Yeah, totally. And then the other part of my dream last night was that I was, and this is just so like
was
obvious.
I in it?
No, you weren't in it.
Okay.
I was on an ice floe, and the ice was breaking around me.
Okay. I mean, I so badly want to know what's going on in your life besides coming here this morning.
Just life.
Yeah,
things are going well.
This is Ben Stiller on goodness.
Exactly.
Do you like dream analysis? I mean, just in your life? I'm not saying from me.
I mean, I'm interested in it. Right. I don't know if I believe in like the sort of like, the theories and books where you go, this means that or this means that.
Well, these are pretty on the nose.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's very obvious. It's not in any way, it's just like, it's just like a pure stress and neurosis.
Congratulations. Yeah. Those were your dreams. All right.
But isn't it good that when you dream like that you're like working, like you're kind of like working stuff out?
Well, that is what it's for, presumably.
Right.
But what I think was interesting was your justification of why you forgot your lines was part of your dream, which is like a highly cognitive thing, I think, to do in your dream, right? Yeah. It's not just like, I forgot my lines. It's like, oh, I'm going to come up with a reason, and then I'm going to tell them to stop making noise. Like,
to try to, so I wouldn't be embarrassed.
Really. Yeah. I'm curious about many things about you. And I do want to say that I've known your wife longer than you have, which is a good feeling.
Yeah.
I think she probably told you.
From Blossom, right?
No, I knew her. Yes, it was during my Blossom years. I would go to this play called the Real Life Brady Bunch play. And I was a teenager, and, I was an odd teenager besides the fact that I was living my life on television. And, my social life was very strange because I was, basically on this set from the time I was 14. But, some of the younger kind of PAs, they would go to these plays and they would do artsy LA things. And so they took me along with them. I must have been, 16 or maybe 15. And so I knew your wife when she was a young actress in the Real Life Brady Bunch play. There's so many paths that kind of led to us sitting here because she then worked with David Lasher, who I worked with on Blossom for almost the entire run of my teen years. So many interesting connections. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was you grew up with not only comedian parents, but you grew up with parents who were prominent, in their own kind of right. And I have a 15 and 18-year-old. And they've
really?
been, yes, I do. I know. Do I not look old enough?
No, you don't.
Oh, God,
that's incredible. And I mean, what ages too?
Yes, yes, 2 boys. And, they've been coming to different terms of understanding themselves in relation to me. My older son recently just wrote one of his college essays about the moment that he realized that I was someone besides just someone's mom. So I was actually curious if you'd be open to kind of starting there. When did you realize that your parents were well known?
Oh man, gosh, that's it's going so far back in my life. I mean, I don't even remember, honestly, because I feel like I just grew up with it. Just my earliest memories of growing up were being in our apartment. And I remember seeing my parents on television when I was probably, I don't know, pretty little. I mean, they were, they were doing it since before I was born. So it was just always a part of our life. And I never really, I never even knew a time when I don't remember a time when I didn't know that they were, that they were actors. Because we were just always sort of a part of their acting life. By that, I mean, like they would go and do summer stock plays and go on the road, and we would go with them, or they'd come out here. We lived in New York. They'd come out to LA and do whatever show or game show, which was, and I don't know. That's my answer. I don't remember.
Is your sister older?
My sister's 4 years older. Yeah.
Okay. And did you grow up kind of assuming that you'd be industry people? Like, was it just like, we are this, like, I don't mean to make you a circus family, but I also, when I look at your parents and their accomplishments, it's like, I can imagine that when you're those people and you have kids, it must feel like, oh, we made more of this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I ever really thought, there were moments when I thought, oh, I'm interested in this or I'm interested in that. But it was always so exciting and interesting to me being around what they were doing. Now, that doesn't mean it was always fun, but it was just very, it was just like more interesting than school, more interesting than kind of like having to study so then there were things like, oh, being an archaeologist or something like that I thought, oh, that could be really cool.
Right.
But I never really pursued it seriously because it involved, oh, you have to like study, you have to work. Like I'd rather go and, hang out at the nightclub with my parents while they're, performing with, I don't know, Lola Falana or something.
Right. What was their marriage like? I mean, did you grow up with people who were funny with each other? Did it always feel, I mean, I'm not saying that it always felt fun and funny, but I'm curious if they workshopped, if your home felt like kind of a workshop of sorts for their craft, or if it was very separate.
Yeah, no, it was totally part of our lives. Because they didn't have they had an office when we were older, but they basically were working in the living room of our apartment. That was their office. Wow. And so they were always, and I'm working on a documentary about my parents. So I've been sort of delving into it a little bit. And I've been, kind of listening to, my dad recorded a lot of audio tapes of them working together, rehearsing of our lives.
Not emotional at all.
Yeah. Oh no, it's crazy. And what I see is the line blurring a lot of the time between they're just them talking and then my dad was always trying to sort of mine their relationship for material and creative material. And because that's how they actually found success. And my mom was a little more resistant to it, but because they both were actors, they met as actors, out of work actors, and we're not comedians, we're not doing comedy.
Right.
And then my dad sort of, I think, identified this thing in their relationship that was funny and got my mom to work on it with him. And that's how they created this comedy team. So that dynamic was always happening in the house. And for us as kids, it was always like they go in the big living room. We called it the big living room. It wasn't that big.
Was there also a small living room or no?
No, there was like a living area. It was an apartment on the Upper West Side, Riverside Drive. And it was like a 6.5 room, river view on the 5th floor. And, not really huge, but they had this living room that they had this sort of like folding white door because they had this architect come in and do like a renovation on it in probably like 1972 or something, So it was like very, 70s and like a lot of bright colors, like green and blue and white. And so they closed the door and they go in and just work in that room, and he'd record. He had a reel-to-reel tape recorder and cassette recorder, and they'd work on whatever it was, like their sketches or their commercials or, different ideas. And a lot of it was just sort of always happening around the house. And in retrospect, I look back, I think, well, that's interesting because, how did they separate their lives? How did they separate their relationship? How did they make their relationship work? They stayed together. They never separated. They never divorced. It wasn't the most, it was that there were ups and downs to the marriage, but they really loved each other. But it was, it was a lot. And looking at it as an adult now and having, been in a marriage and having kids, it's, I have a totally different perspective on it. But as kids, it was just like, yeah, they're doing their thing. And, as a kid, you're not thinking about what your parents' responsibilities are or anything like that. You're just
you. You didn't grow up in my house.
Really?
Well,
really?
But it's just everybody does it different, Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by BetterHelp. From time to time, we all experience racing thoughts that keep us up at night, wake us up early, or both, or prevent us from being able to enjoy life. Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, all of a sudden your brain will not stop talking? Or do you find that your thoughts start racing right before bed or at other inopportune moments? Well, turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy is a place to do that so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. That's exactly what therapy does for me. It's why I go twice a week, sometimes more when I need it. And it's why I'm just a person who's always going to go to therapy, because those thoughts will start creeping in if I don't keep track of them. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch at any time for no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/break today. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/break. Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Nutrafol. Ever wish you had visibly thicker hair? I do. How about less shedding? Yes, please. Maybe stress is causing your hair to thin, or is it the other way around? There are multiple root causes of hair thinning, and Nutrafol addresses key root causes through a whole body approach to hair health. Are you tired of dealing with thinning hair? Yes, I am Nutrafol. Well, Nutrafol is here to help. Their hair growth supplements use drug-free ingredients to target root causes of thinning hair and promote healthy hair growth. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve visible thickness and strength. From postpartum to menopause to plant-based lifestyles, no matter your life stage, Nutrafol's got 4 unique formulas to support women. Each is physician-formulated using drug-free, science-backed ingredients so you get the most reliable results. Go to Nutrafol.com, take their hair health wellness quiz. Identify causes of your thinning hair, and Nutrafol gives you a personalized plan for better hair growth through their whole body health approach. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting root causes of thinning, stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, lifestyle, metabolism through whole body health. Nutrafol is now available in a vegan formula. That's why I just started. Their newest supplement is formulated for women ages 18 and over with plant-based lifestyles who are experiencing signs of hair thinning. In a clinical study, 86% of women reported improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol Women's Hair Growth Supplement for 6 months. I can't wait. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. I did. For a limited time, Nutrafol's offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code BREAK. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, that's spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code BREAK. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code BREAK. It's funny, since I've not really seen you do interviews, I know a lot about you because I know just about your parents and, it's kind of, it's a really interesting Hollywood family that you're part of. And a lot of people don't know that your mom was not Jewish. Like people think of Ben Stiller, forgive me, as you're like a Jewish actor and you are for, every intent. I mean,
well, she did. She converted.
Right. Yeah. But I'm saying like a lot of people don't think of her as a not born Jewish person. People assume that was your, kind of upbringing.
Irish Catholic.
What? Yeah. How did they meet? Do you know like a bit about your parents' story? Because at that time also, I think it's interesting. Your dad was of a generation where that often didn't happen in those days. Right. So I'm just curious.
They met in an agent's office. And it's one of the things in the documentary that we get into because, basically it became a story that they told on talk shows all the time about going into an agent's office, and the agent, I mean, it's of another time, but basically the story was that like my mom went into the agent's office, and the agent, quote unquote, started chasing her around the desk.
Wow.
It's a funny story about, which is not funny anymore.
Doesn't hold up well.
And then my dad's part of the story was my dad went in and he started chasing him around the office. And this was the funny story that they told on talk shows for years. And I don't even know, I never got to the heart of like what the reality of that story was, but it's based in some sort of reality of like an agent who was definitely crossing the line.
Right.
And they, he took her out for a cup of coffee after that. And very quickly they were a couple.
I love that. I didn't know that she converted. So absolutely that counts. I didn't mean to discount that, but I didn't know that.
But she was the one who probably was the most, my dad was pretty spiritual and definitely connected to his Judaism. Mm-hmm. My mom knew more probably about religion since she had to learn about it.
Right.
And was committed to it also, but we weren't a very religious family.
Right. You were bar mitzvah though, right?
I was, yeah.
I mean, so was Drake. So I've got a list of amazing bar mitzvahs I want to know.
Really?
Did your bar mitzvah have a theme?
No, this was like, it
was a different
1978.
Yeah.
So it was not there wasn't that fancy.
Right.
It was the party was in the basement of the synagogue.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and the biggest thing that happened was that my two friends and I played the drums and my friend played bass. We played I think we played Hey Jude at the reception, which was exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really awesome. So. I don't want to poke at like, could you have done other things? Because it sounds like you didn't love school. That wasn't something you were interested in pursuing. But I do have this like, I'm interested in sort of sliding doors, parallel universe opportunities. Like, I wonder, if there was ever a time that you were like, I'm not going to become a filmmaker. This isn't going to be my life because I could do X, Y, or Z.
Like I said, the archaeology thing was interesting to me. And
which part of it?
I loved history. Okay. I do still love history. And the idea of, unearthing the past. And so I was sort of drawn to movies and TV shows about that and books. And, at that time you would like, we had an Encyclopedia Britannica set. It was that was on the shelf that you would like open it up and you can like check, like ancient Egypt and, and the idea of traveling and going somewhere and this was like pre Indiana Jones or anything like that. But that was really fascinating to me. But again, it was just sort of the study aspect of it. And then my sort of interest in directing and filmmaking kind of started when I was like 8 or 9. And that kind of took over. Astronomy was also another area, but unfortunately that was math.
Yeah.
And the gene in our family for math is not really that strong and not dominant. So I'm really, really bad at math. So, and when I learned that math was essentially mainly what astronomy was about, like, then I was like, okay, I'm not doing that. But I did, we lived near the Hayden Planetarium and there was an astronomy class they had on Saturday mornings that I went to, that my mom went to with me.
Wow.
Which I loved, which was sort of like, just like a fun astronomy class. So yeah, but I think, it never really was that serious. I think my grades weren't great. I didn't, by the time I got to, being a senior in high school, my options academically were not that broad.
Were you funny in school? Like, were you a class clown guy? We have a lot of comedians who come on here, and I think of you as a filmmaker, honestly, before I even think of you as an actor. But I'm always curious. Like, were you that guy?
Like Eugene Levy and Waiting for Guffin. I was not the class clown, but I studied class clown. No, I was not the class clown. I was kind of awkward and not like a total nerd, but like kind of just sort of like in that middle zone of like a nothingness. You know what I mean?
That's the title of your memoir, The Middle Zone of Nothingness.
So yeah, so it was sort of like, I had friends who were probably more on the kind of like, not nerdy side, but like they were like kind of like the science kids.
Right.
And there was one teacher at our school who actually still teaches at high school. And both my kids went to this high school. And we just celebrated, it's his 50th year of teaching at that school.
That's unbelievable.
And at the time, his name is John Rader, a great science teacher. So he was the best teacher for me I had at that school. But yet I was not a good science student.
Right.
But he was a great teacher. So, and I was in his homeroom. And so my friends who were like in that group were sort of more in that area. So not the cool kids for sure.
What, you mentioned being kind of starting to be interested in film, as it were, as a wee one. Was there a particular movie or particular kind of genre that was interesting to you? I mean, I'm 10 years younger than you, so I was raised on like the classic sitcoms of the 70s. Like I have a very different, set of like comedians that influenced me. But I'm curious.
Well, I was raised on the sitcoms of the 70s.
That's true too.
I wasn't born in the 50s. But I love TV.
Right.
I love TV and I love movies. And for me, at first, it was the movies. And this was, at a time when you would go to the movies.
Yes.
And there was the Lowe's 84th Street on Broadway that I would go to, and Planet of the Apes, Poseidon Adventure, even like movies like Death Wish. Growing up on the Upper West Side at that time, it was a little bit rougher. It was a lot rougher, and so that was part of life. Was like and Death Wish, like the whole thing was like shot Riverside Park. So these and the Super 8 films I made were like these little revenge movies about kids like basically like mugging me, and then me with my friends coming and like beating them up. But I loved those kinds of like action movies and disaster movies, and then I sort of discovered comedy and like Woody Allen movies and. Then when I was a teenager, later teens into early 20s, Albert Brooks movies were really big. But it was kind of eclectic, I think. Yeah. And then TV, I was watching all the sitcoms, watching, $6 Million Man, Charlie's Angels. All of it,
That's how you learn about women. By watching shows like Charlie's Angels.
Yeah, it is, and it was all kind of the TV part of it. I think was such a huge influence. Maybe because my parents were, in the big living room working a lot of the time, and so we were kind of left to our own devices a little bit.
I'm curious, you've talked a bit about this. There was an interview you did in particular in Esquire magazine that was very interesting, and talked a lot about sort of aspects of your persona, your personality. And I'm curious if you have sort of any insight into sort of how you developed as a person in terms of your mental wellness. Meaning, a lot of us raised by parents. I think my parents are probably similar in a lot of ways to, let's say, your parents. There's a generational, vibe. There's intergenerational trauma, which is what they call it now. But I'm curious, did you grow up with a lot of anxiety? Did you feel like an anxious kid? You've talked about kind of your parents' moods, and, that happens a lot with creative people. But I'm kind of curious what your vibe was.
I think I wasn't that self-aware when I was a kid. When I look back on it now, when you said anxious, I was like, I was very connected to my parents. I got homesick a lot. I had some traumatic events that happened when I was away from my parents. Things would get, it was scary to be on my own. Now, I haven't really explored that. I mean, I've been in therapy over the years in different forms of therapy. And I guess I have explored it, but I mean, in terms of like why I was so connected to them. I mean, I feel like, you love your parents, you want to be with your parents. That's a natural thing. Sure. They probably were, they're going away a lot to work. They would come out here to LA to work a lot. They never wanted to move to LA. They were New Yorkers. Right. So they would go for a few weeks at a time. And when you're a kid, a couple of weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
And so my sister and I were kind of on our own with our housekeeper, Hazel, who was our sort of second mom.
Mhm.
And I think, when I look back on things that I did, they were very, there was a lot of anxiousness, I think, or kind of fear of being alone.
Mhm.
But when they were there, my parents were, I mean, my mom had issues across her life with alcoholism. She got sober
I didn't know that.
and was really explored that stuff and was pretty
How
amazing.
old were
about
you?
it. When she got sober,
Yeah.
when I was grown up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But she really like went into sort of like trying to figure that stuff out.
Mhm.
She had a very tough childhood. She lost her mom when she was 10. She was an only child, and my dad grew up very, very poor.
Right.
And I think there was a lot of fighting in his parents.
Were
with
his parents born in America?
Yeah, his father was.
Okay.
His mom was born in Poland.
Okay.
And so they had it.
Yeah.
I think pretty rough in terms of just at growing up at a time when nobody talked about this stuff.
Sure.
And my parents were in the 70s. There was a lot of different therapies happening,
Mhm.
and EST and things like that, and
Mhm.
which we took. We
What
all
is
took
that?
EST,
What is
the
that?
Earhart Seminars training. It was like
I don't know about this.
Really? Oh,
What-
you
what-
got it. Was this sort of new age sort of like confronting all the issues in your life, where you'd go off for a couple of weekends with a trainer.
Oh.
Yeah. And
Wait, how old were you when you did this?
well, I was probably about 10 when I did it. My parents and my sister took it too, but they had a children's training and a teen training. My sister took the teen training. I took the children's training. But it was a very popular thing in terms of people who were doing self-exploration in the 70s.
It's very progressive. I mean,
It was very progressive. And it turned into something else called the Forum later on. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Okay, yes, that I've heard
Okay,
of.
so that's what S was.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
And it was a little bit controversial too, because it was basically like people being kind of like confronted with their issues by a person in a room with a lot of people, and kind of being like,
it's a bit of exposure therapy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're 10, it was like it's a little bit strange because it's like, what do I have to, like, what are my issues that I've built up over the 10 years of my life?
Well, it's kind of funny. It's funny that you mentioned that. I mentioned that you're exactly 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
So when I was born, you were doing this.
Yeah.
And, I grew up, if Jonathan were here, he'd be like, get out your bingo cards. She's going to mention all the things that she mentions when she talks about her childhood. But, my parents did move to the West Coast. My father reluctantly moved. My mother was like 9 months pregnant. Like, this is the story, is that she said, if I have to put a child in one more effing snowsuit, I'm going to throw the child out the window. That would have been my brother, who's 4 years older than me. Anyway, so I was born, we were living in my grandparents' living room because it was a hasty move. And I'm sure there's more to that story. But I was born in San Diego, in just like whatever hospital was near my grandparents. And my parents were documentary filmmakers. And so like my dad was a very reluctant, West Coaster. But, this kind of like progressiveness really hadn't reached, the circles that I grew up in. So I think it's very interesting because when you're describing this kind of progressiveness and, your understanding of, of kind of the way you grew up, for many people, I'm not just speaking for myself, but, for many people, if you were raised in alcoholism, if you are raised, with complexity, my father of blessed memory was bipolar. So I grew up with a lot of complexity and we didn't call it that. It was just like, oh, sometimes it's like this and sometimes it's like that. And sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. But it's just kind of interesting to think about, those first 10 years of your life, right? So I think it's really fascinating that your parents also had, access to that or kind of presence of mind to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I give them a lot of credit for trying to just delve into it and explore it. I think it's interesting because there were a lot of sort of mixed messages happening because I think they were they were trying to figure it out too.
Right.
And I think over all of it was sort of the pressure of being, actors and show
Totally.
business, having to make a living, having to be successful. This business that we know is like can be really, really challenging. And at a time when I think it was just a very different time in terms of everything, in terms of
Right.
How people talked about things. It was a time when all this stuff was coming out into the open. And I think for their generation, having grown up with nobody talking about this stuff, I'm sure that they saw it as a way to really, to grow. But at the same time, they were also trying to get through their lives.
Right.
And so that's what we grew up with, was a lot of like, sort of like, oh, we're taking S, but also my parents are fighting and they're not talking about it. And then, my mom will go close the door to the bedroom and like, what's going on? So
I'm curious, because we do talk on this podcast a lot about different kinds of therapy. What were some other kinds of therapy that you either knew about, heard about, tried, or like what else was going on in the 70s and 80s in New York that I missed out on? Was there scream therapy?
There was. My dad did some sort of therapy where you went into a room and like you had foam bats and you hit right. Yeah.
That's a thing.
I don't know. All I know is that he went and did that. And my dad had like all this repressed rage, which he then channeled into his kind of brilliant comedic acting,
Right.
And that was like a big dynamic between my parents, I mean, and it was sort of, that was always going on. But like looking back on it, I'm like, well, that's really cool that he went and did that, we did family therapy.
Oh, how was that?
All
four of you?
Yeah.
Oh.
It was really interesting.
Was that like, let's try this out, or like, something's got to shift here, people, get your ass on the subway?
No, it was because my parents were in therapy and they were doing it, and they had a therapist that they both went to also. They, I guess, a couples therapist who they went to for a while, and then they invited us to all come in, my sister and I ended up doing a sketch of it on very when I was like 25, which my parents we all acted in. And that was kind of like the dynamic in our house, was like, I think like we were doing things like that in real life and then constantly like turning them into,
So wait, did you go like once? You went 6 times.
Went a few
you went
times.
for a year. What was it?
No, we went like a few times, I think. But
did people throw things and cry? Because that's what happened when my family went to therapy.
Well, it was, yeah. I mean, the thing about it was, looking back, was like it was their therapist, so I feel like it wasn't an even playing field. It wasn't like a neutral therapist.
Sure.
But I mean, I don't remember much about it other than kind of, because my sister was going through her own issues, and everybody was kind of coming from their own place. So it didn't last that long.
Right. Were you in therapy alone at any time? Did they ever make you go?
They didn't. No one made. I feel like I might have gone a few times. I don't know. I started. Yeah, I mean, I've been in and out over the years,
Got it.
And I've never done psychoanalysis or anything.
So
like
what
that.
kind of therapy do you like? Because some people like cognitive behavioral therapy. Some people like, I don't know, hypnosis. Like, I don't know.
I mean,
dialectical behavior. I can name them all.
I'm not, that well versed in.
Oh, but you talk about your feelings?
Yeah, talking about. I mean, I don't know if honestly, like I go back and forth because I have friends who've done different kinds of therapies where it's like more like, this is like more interactive and you're actually doing stuff.
Yeah.
Or you're, like you said, just not dialectical. It's just like talking.
Well, there's different methods, but like cognitive behavioral therapy, you get like assignments and you have to like do stuff. And, like, I mean, I've tried them all. That can work for like obsessive compulsive disorder. It can work for anxiety. It can work for PTSD. But like psychoanalysis, like the like Woody Allen kind of classic psychoanalysis that we think about, or Dustin Hoffman, which was part of his, acting training, was to be in proper psychoanalysis. And they would go
that's
like
lying
3,
on the couch
4,
and
that's like many times a week.
Yeah.
Like
I tried that a couple of times, just lying on the couch and talking where they don't say anything to you. It's just,
you could just be the therapist.
Really? Oh, I thought that was part of it.
Well, but in general, like when we talk about like psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, that's sort of talking about like, what you're doing and where it might have come from. Whereas cognitive behavioral therapy is like, I don't care what your mother was like. Stop behaving this way or stop thinking this way, or we'll help you, find new tools.
Right.
So it sounds like you generally talk about things though.
Well, like, do you know like Phil Stutz, the guy that Jonah Hill did the
Yeah.
documentary about. Yeah, I saw him for a while.
Oh.
Yeah, I think he's great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
so
he does
that's-
actually give you tools,
Right.
specific tools, which I think are really
Yeah.
helpful.
Are you a meditator?
Not regularly.
Okay, because I
But
didn't
I did
know.
take. That was one of the things.
I was going to say, go ahead.
in the 70s, TM was.
I was
going
to ask you about TM.
Yeah. That was one of the places.
Did you all get a mantra?
Yeah.
Did you ever use your mantra? I'm not going to ask
Yeah.
you your mantra. I know you can't
You're not
tell me
supposed
your
to
mantra.
talk about your mantra. Yeah.
Okay, but did you use it?
I got my mantra when I was like 12, probably.
Is it the same one you would get at 22, 32, 42, 52?
It's the
Like,
only
that's your mantra.
It's the only mantra I've ever gotten. So I don't know. I mean, I never went back.
So did they teach you at 12 how to
They
use it?
gave me a mantra, and then we sat in a room. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes when I'm wanting to meditate, I'll try using the mantra.
What do you mean try? There is no try.
Well,
There is
sometimes if I'm being
That's a Yoda
honest,
quote.
if
Yeah.
I'm being honest, I don't
Yeah.
always use the mantra. Sometimes
it,
I'll
got
just
it.
like close my eyes and
Okay.
and breathe. Yeah. Isn't that, well, that's meditating,
That's
right?
a thing,
I mean,
yes.
I know there's all different types of,
So since we're getting into this, I'm curious, were there other things, because in the 70s also like yoga became a thing. Like,
Right.
did your parents integrate any somatic or body practices into the family therapy system?
There was no yoga happening.
Okay. That was too West Coast.
Yeah, no, my mom was not a yoga person, and my dad wasn't either. My dad was going to the Y.
Got
and
it.
running around the track, but like we lived in this building where, do you know Peter Max, the artist?
No.
He was very big in the 70s, and if you saw his art, you'd recognize it, like this kind of pop art thing, and he was very he knew Swami Satchidananda, who had been with, I guess, the Beatles had connected with, and I remember him coming to visit the building, and I was riding my skateboard in front of the building, and he got on my skateboard. So there's like a feeling of like all those different sort of 70s progressive, things that were happening around. But we never did yoga. This was not with my parents, though. This was my friend Adam and I when I was, I think, like a junior or senior in high school. Do you remember the Silva mind control method?
I've heard of it.
Jose Silva, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was basically like a way of like, I don't know if it was like actually therapy or like almost like a sort of a way of manifesting things.
Huh.
And my friend Adam, I thought, oh, this is really cool. We went and we did the Silva mind control training somewhere downtown on like the east side, New York. And there was a thing called a 3-finger technique. And I remember like you do this 3-finger technique where you could basically like visualize what you wanted. And I remember the thing that I was trying to visualize was finding a parking spot in New York because that was so hard to find. I remember that's like one of my earliest memories is my dad going and sitting double parked. They had alternate side of the street parking in New York. So like there were, Tuesdays and Thursday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can't park on the side of the street because the street sweepers come.
Thank you for defining alternate side parking.
I mean, nobody's going to know what I'm talking about,
true.
right?
Sorry, West Coast.
And so the thing would be that if you had a car, that you'd have to go and sit in the car for like a half an hour, 45 minutes before, whatever, like from 1:30 to 2 to make sure they didn't tow you away so you could get a spot by the time 2 o'clock came. So that was the thing that in Silva Mind Control, like, if you could use the 3-finger technique to visualize a parking spot. And I remember we took this really seriously.
Do you identify with any features of growing up with a mom who struggled with alcoholism? Like when you think about like the patterns that people talk about, do you identify with any of those? Because
sure,
like they say like if you want to figure out why you're doing something, stop doing it, which is usually something that people say to people who drink or whatever you're doing, whether you're shopping or porn, like whatever it is. If you want to figure out why you're doing it, stop.
Right.
So I'm imagining that also. That's she was protecting herself from something.
Like I said, she had so much trauma, and the thing that I'm so grateful for is that I think so many people who live with alcoholism is in their families. It's never dealt with, right? It's never ever explored or even talked about, and so that's what I'm grateful for is that she really delved into that in her therapy but yeah, I mean, of course, those feelings like for me, for someone who's a functioning alcoholic, it's basically you're trying to sort of navigate that because
Right.
it's not dramatic,
Right.
And I think those, feelings, whatever feelings I had probably also were just like for being, I think, a kid who, when your parents go away a lot too. So it was like sort of, I think, a combination of those things. But like maybe a sense of like, kind of like just being insecure, right? Or not,
Vigilant.
wanting to feel, wanting to feel safe, which I think every human being does.
Right.
And it just sort of exacerbates that more probably when,
You have a really sweet story with your wife, and one of the things that's so interesting to me is you grew up with parents who worked together, and you are with someone who you have worked with, in some cases continue to work with. I'm curious what that sort of felt like in real time in terms of building a relationship, because also it's hard for any two creatives to be together, but there's also an entire other emotional relationship that you effectively have to have with someone if you're going to be with them and raise children. I'm curious, especially as you work on this documentary about your parents, if some of those themes seem more prominent, less prominent, or if it's completely different.
No, I mean, I think it all sort of like interweaves, I mean, and when I was a kid, I was like, I'm not going to do what my parents do. I'm
Right.
not going to do comedy. I'm going to be serious filmmakers, and that actually is something that I always really wanted to do. But then I also, I had to sort of like give in to the reality that, I like comedy and it's part of, who I am.
You're pretty good at it too. So it's like...
But I mean, but it's funny in relationship, it's the same thing, like watching my parents work together. I think I saw both the positive and the negative aspects of how that affected their relationship. And I never thought about that when I got together with Christine, but yet we did meet working together. And we did work together a lot and have worked together a lot. And those things definitely do affect the relationship. I think I had a little bit of a fear of, maybe subconsciously, of working together affecting our relationship in a not good way. Probably from seeing the things that, but yet the other side of it is my parents stayed together and loved each other.
Also, your parents were, I mean, not that you and Christine are not partners, but also when you have a role as a director, for example, it's very different. It's very different than, creating simultaneously in a way that's more parallel, and I don't mean to make it a stratified hierarchical thing, but I just can't even imagine, what that must be like. It's an extra dynamic.
Yeah. And that is a lot about in this documentary, what I'm looking at, because my dad was always aware that this dynamic between them was part of what they were not working as actors. They weren't getting jobs. And then my dad had this idea, well, what if we took our relationship, Jewish guy, Irish Catholic woman, and let's like do a comedy act about that at a time when a lot of people, weren't talking about that and it wasn't an accepted thing. And so they put this act together and they all of a sudden found success. And then they went on the Ed Sullivan show like 30 times and it changed their lives. So that dynamic was actually part of their success. And then how they sort of navigated their relationship with that, was very complicated. But as an actor and a director with like working with Christine, I think at the end of the day, it's about respecting each other. I so respect her point of view on things creatively. Even if we're not actually working on something, writing something together or doing something together, we talk about everything. I talk about, her project. She talks about, I give her stuff to read. We talk about it. And
but that's a very diplomatic answer, which I appreciate. And I think it's true. I also am just thinking about what it must be like to work with someone, be part of that creative process. And then that's who you go home with.
Yeah.
Like when I directed, like I could not deal with anything when I left that set. I didn't want to be, don't look at me like I was by myself in a hotel room, like in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And I was grateful that no one, like I didn't have my kids at that time. I can't imagine processing like at that level with the person that I was working with all day.
Right.
What's
Right.
that? Do you go and be separate at night?
No, I mean,
But you can't always tell an actor that they're great, but we need to hear it too.
yeah, I think, and probably it's more the reverse where like when I'm working, like
Right.
the feedback that I'm like, oh, what did you think? What did you think? Was that good? It's really
You're that guy.
more about me. Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
For sure.
Got it.
Which can be very tough on
I
the
see.
other person.
Right.
And I think we've figured that out over the years. We've figured out how to navigate it, but it's not easy for sure.
Right.
And I probably put way too much importance on that, like the creative sort of approval thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which can really, really get in the way of a relationship, right? If I'm like, well, what did you really think?
Sure.
And yet, like, well, as of course, like she's going to say, well, she knows, like, she's, I didn't think it was good. Like, well, that's going to affect the rest of the night.
Sure.
Or maybe the rest of our lives.
The stakes are not high at all.
But yet I'm like, you got to be honest with me.
Right. How many films have you done together?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I mean, we haven't done one for a while.
Right.
But we did a few.
Okay.
We did a few. And kind of like very early on when we had first met, too.
Yeah. What an interesting part of courtship also, right? I mean,
and we met working
romance.
together too. Yeah.
That's very romantic to me. Like just as an outsider.
Yeah.
And especially like as an actor person, like that's very romantic. Just this notion that like you meet someone, no matter what, position or you have or they have, there's something very romantic about being in a creative space and also having that spark of creativity that is love.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. People who work together, write together, and can find a way. To me, what I think of is like it's like almost like a deeper connection because you're really like, you're coming together on not just sort of your relationship stuff,
Sure.
but like this creative stuff, which for creative people, I think sometimes, maybe I'm speaking for myself, it's hard to separate out,
Right.
as I was saying, but like it really is, like it's so much a part of who you are. So if you can connect on that level together, I think that's an amazing thing. I mean, it's not, it's not perfect. And like I said, with my folks, I watched that over the years, how they did that. But they had a very specific thing because they performed together all the time.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that it's a thing that doesn't really exist, I mean, it's from a different
era.
That kind of.
And they also lived through the changing of how, of really what people watched and,
sure.
like where comedy teams, they lived through comedy teams then not being something that people
Right.
really were seeking out.
Right.
And
Totally.
they also were trying to navigate their own feelings about what they wanted to do separately too.
Right.
So, that part of it was challenging too.
I wanted to ask one more thing about Christine because it's something that she talked about when she was here. And I'm not trying to do a tit for tat, but speaking of kind of a little bit of this romance, she talked about this kind of, fascinating turn of events in terms of your relationship and what COVID sort of brought out.
Yeah.
And, there's something, again, very romantic. I don't mean to, I have romanticized your relationship in case you haven't. But there's also something really, beautiful and enduring about it. It sounds like the amount of work that is involved in actually keeping something going. And so I'm not interested, and I said this to her as well, I'm not interested in like the details and like, it's not my business. It's nobody's business. But I am interested kind of in light of everything you've been talking about kind of the introspection that you seem to do and whether you've gone in and out of therapy or whatever. I'm curious, and this is when we started this podcast was during COVID. COVID brought up all the things.
Yeah.
And, as I said, like you either like the person you're with or you do not like the person you're with, or you either are stuck with the shit about yourself or you're gonna fix it, or you're gonna start, taking it apart. I'm curious if there was anything, in that sort of process that you felt was like the result of work that you were doing, or if there was something in particular that felt like COVID brought out something for you that, made you feel like, gosh, I'm going to look at life differently. Because I think a lot of people had that in different ways.
Well, yeah. I mean, also we had been separated and we came back together. So that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I think...
but I'm like, I guess the question is like, was it like, the world's going to end, I might as well be with the person that I know that I love the most? Like, was there that, or was it other stuff that you were going through personally?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it happened to coincide with a place in our relationship where we were trying to figure out, whether or not we were going to be together or not. We weren't together and had been separated for a couple of years. So, but I think we both had the desire to explore that, and I know I did. And I think COVID then, look, I think we made the decision when lockdown happened that we were going to all stay in our house together when we hadn't been living together. And I think part of that was, I don't know, you'd have to ask her on her end whether or not.
I think she was like, he was just there. Like, he just kept being there.
Right. But in my mind, I was like, I had intentionally wanted to get back together.
Got it.
So I don't know if she did or not. I get the feeling could have gone either way. But for whatever reason, she said yes to us all being together. I think it was like, it made sense practically, but for me, it was like, okay, we're all going to be together. And then for like a year, we were in the house together, but we weren't really a couple together. But the thing is, we really enjoy hanging out with each other.
Right.
I mean, we've had all sorts of ups and downs, and it's not a perfect relationship in any way. But at the end of the day, we really appreciate each other. And I know that since we got back together, on my end, I appreciate it even more because I don't take whatever I might have taken for granted before. Once you, especially being in a long-term, like 20-year marriage.
Well, and raising kids, when I meet people who don't have kids for whatever reason, there's an amount of envy of like, you didn't have the test of tests of like, do you want to look at this person's face every 2 hours when you're waking up to feed the baby and want to choke them?
Well, it just changes your life completely.
Well, so there's a stress element also. Yeah. There's a pressure, that being a parent inflicts on the family.
I'm very impressed with couples that stay together both with and without kids.
Yeah, for sure.
Because each way it's like the couples that don't have kids, I'm like, okay, well, you guys really have really figured out that you want to be with each other.
Right.
I think when
you're not staying together for the kids.
Right. Yeah. And kids can keep you together in a way to the point where then you have to really question, okay, well, am I here because I want to be here? And you do love your kids and you want to be there. You want them to have, you think about your parents. And like for me, the pressure was, oh, well, my parents never broke up.
Right.
But I also saw the tension between that, and then they'd come back together, and ultimately they really did love each other. And
but as a child, you don't get a vote. On any given day, if you would have asked me as a child, I would have been like, I don't know if this is going to work out, people.
Right. Oh, for sure.
But we don't get votes. So, yeah.
And for whatever reason, they decided to stay together. And then as they got older, they were just like, I saw them kind of really appreciate each other, which is pretty amazing. And so I think, I think we found each other in that, like I said, I'd kind of really, had wanted that. And I think it happened pretty organically, which was great. And then, it was such a weird time.
Yeah.
My daughter graduated high school, at home. It was, it's just like, it was a strange thing, but we did, which a lot of families did, came together and we all watched movies at night, and we were spending time that, for me, working a lot, I think I tend to kind of like disappear into my work. So not having that, though
that's my favorite drug is my work.
Oh, for sure. Work is definitely a drug. And workaholism is a real thing, for sure.
Did that shift for you over COVID? Because it had to?
Kind of, except I was still working.
But the concept of
I couldn't help it.
shifted.
It wasn't my choice. Like I was working on a show that we had started, and basically, then it stopped when everything happened, and then 6 months later, is like we're going into production. We're doing this. So it was kind of both things happening. But definitely in terms of just overall like workaholism, I think over the years, it's very, very easy to fall into that.
Yeah.
And neglect
I think
other
that's
parts
true.
of your life.
That's also true because I think some people might be like, well, it's easier for Ben Stiller to say like he's successful. But I think it's true no matter what level you're at in your life. Meaning there are times you can make yourself busy. You can use that as your drug no matter what level of the industry you're at or whatever level of your career you're at, meaning if it's filling that, the God-shaped hole, as 12-step programs call it, if it's just filling that place of like, I'd rather not think about my feelings or process my emotions.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're making movies that are being released in theaters or if you're working at the corner store or if you're an at-home parent. Like, you can fill it with stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're a creative person, it's even more complicated because I feel I love work.
Yeah.
I love what I do. And I feel lucky that I love that I'm able to, to earn a living doing what I love doing. But then the line is really blurred between, okay, well, how much am I expressing myself here and how much am I disappearing into this or escaping from real life? And I think part of what the COVID experience was people had to kind of stop and or were forced to look at, like you said, kind of like, what am I doing here?
Right.
And there's a line or there's a thought in a movie, which I won't name the movie or the filmmaker, where at the end of the movie, the character says, like, are we just all like kind of creating all of our issues and problems in our lives here because we don't want to deal with the bigger questions? Like, what are we doing here? What is life?
Yep.
And I think that's a very real thing. So, anytime you can stop and actually just sort of like not do anything. And that's something that my dad actually was a real proponent of just like resting and just, and not staying busy. Though he always was working, but it kind of like, it can be a little bit scary.
Well, I was just going to ask, I recently took a 2-week complete unplugging. No computer, no phone.
Wow.
I mean, forget about no social media, which I've kind of been off for several years with any consistency, but
You're
I
really
had,
missing out.
well, I had gotten in the habit of, like the New York Times, every time there was a blank spot in my day, like any news story, and so like I shut all that down for 2 weeks, and it was just me and this guy who's not here right now. But I didn't see anyone. I didn't talk to my mom. That was the hardest, was explaining to her, like, Ma, I'm gonna be off the grid and I'm okay, but I'm not gonna talk to you for 2 weeks. It's not personal. She took it okay, but I really shut it all down. And unbelievable things happen when you do that, as you can imagine.
Did you go somewhere?
No, I was basically here. It was a lot of therapy. It was a lot of introspection. It was it was a lot of working on stuff that I had put so much stuff on top of that I thought it could never get out,
Yeah.
And, you see, like I said, if you want to figure out why you're doing something, stop doing it. Right. And just everything kind of, there was a lot of clarity that came. And mostly though, what I found is time in my head to think, like to have thoughts that weren't generated by responding to something or reacting to something. So I'm actually curious. I know you're a Trekkie, right? Like you have interests in the Trekkie world. But I'm curious.
Original series, yeah.
Well, but I'm curious though, kind of, you don't need to take a 2-week break to kind of go inside. I'm curious what other things you do when you're not working. Meaning, do you enjoy social media? Like, are you a video game person? Like, I'm sure you spend time with your kids and your wife, but I'm kind of curious, like, what other things kind of keep you feeling like, oh, I'm not just a human, doing instead of a human being.
A human doing, yeah. By the way, I give you a lot of credit for doing that. That's seriously, that makes me want to do that because it's challenging and scary. And when you think about it, it's like, oh, well, that's like scary.
No phone in your hand. It's crazy.
Oh my God. And I really do resent that I'm so connected to my phone, and I'm super aware of how much I check it all the time. I got off of Instagram. And the hardest thing about that was the connection, the family connection, because the one, I think, positive thing about it is that you can stay connected with people that, in your family, and especially having kids, and I felt very much like an outsider where, I wasn't able to like, and now they just like will tell me about like, oh yeah, this post or that post.
Yep.
But I'm still on Twitter or whatever it is. And it's awful. But it's all a big distraction for sure. And when I'm working, if I'm trying to write, I know this isn't answering your question yet, but like if I'm trying to write, like the biggest thing is like to get off of the internet. And I mean, is it weird to say that I actually like, I guess for me, like to have a space to read or write feels like it's actually a break for me.
Yeah.
I love to go to Hawaii. We have a place in Hawaii probably for like the last 20 years. And that's kind of like where I've always felt like at least I could connect, with sort of like nature.
What do you do? Do you like swimming? Do you do sports in the water?
I'm not sit? Like, I like to play tennis.
Okay. No pickleball?
I have not tried pickleball.
I see a date in our future.
Are you a pickleballer?
Yeah.
Really?
Both of us are, yeah.
I mean, I'm getting a lot of pressure to try pickleball.
I mean, Jamie Foxx has a court, so just if he invites you, bring me along. I'm a very good partner.
Waiting for the invite. No, I mean,
tennis.
I feel like I have so much work to do on my tennis game that I don't want to like introduce pickleball.
It's the whole thing.
But yeah, nature. Yeah, I like to like I mean, like I'll go out like on a paddle board every once in a while, or just like having space and just like being able to like just sit and really feel like, I guess, the license to do nothing. Like, unfortunately for me, I feel like I sometimes have to go somewhere to feel like it's okay to not do anything. And you're right, like that so much comes in when you have that space. And I don't know. I mean, I'm constantly working on that sort of line between creativity, working too much. Where is the place where I need to take space and not do that? I tend to fill the space though a lot. For me, I feel like I'm always editing. But yet, like, tell me what you think of this. But I really do enjoy that process.
Oh yeah,
creatively. Like I really feel like I don't know if it's like cool to say or not, but like I really feel I really enjoy when I'm in process working on a creative project.
It's funny because I started acting. I was 11 and then I was in Beaches when I was 12. So like I had this like late start for a child actor, meaning most kids start at 3 or 4, they're in commercials. Like I was I was the girl who like didn't know how to memorize lines, but I just figured it out, and I know that sounds funny to people, but like when I went to audition at 11, they were used to girls who already knew how to like smile and pose. I knew none of that. Like I showed up in like Converse and weird tie-dye clothes. I mean, look, Gary Marshall thought it was fine. So like there I was. But I felt very green, even at 11. But, kind of that notion of my life sort of became like, I'm an actor and I live on this box. I've been in 3 sitcoms, in my life. Like I live in this TV screen and, I've done other things and I got a degree in neuroscience and I have 2 kids and all this stuff, but I live in this box, and when I had the opportunity to direct and it was, something that I wrote, which like, I just couldn't imagine explaining to a director how like, cause I already saw it in my head, and when I had the opportunity to direct, it was the first time in my life that I was like, oh, everything about me was made to do this. My critical eye, my romantic eye, my appreciation of color and angles and negative space, and like my deep desire to understand the mechanics of an interaction, how to show that. Editing was like unbelievably gratifying. And I realized like sometimes you're in your 40s when everything coalesces. And, this can happen with relationships or it can happen with a lot of things. But also that notion of I see how people get lost in this kind of world.
Right.
Because as an actor, you go home at the end of the day, you make dinner for your kids. Being a director, being in that role where like, every crew person, you're, fielding every problem, answering that, it was so stimulating. I mean, it was like every part of my brain and being was being utilized. I was like, this is what they made me for,
That's great. Yeah.
I know, but it's intense.
Yeah, but it is. But instinctually, I feel like I knew that that's what I wanted to do before I knew even why I wanted to do it.
It was because you took est. That's why.
Maybe. But I was so not self-aware for so many years of like, why am I even wanting to do this? And it's just like listening to something inside of you. And I think the challenge, though, in terms of talking about like the workaholism aspect of it is, for me, is like looking at, okay, I know this is what I love to do and I could just do this, but what is it that I want to explore about myself as I'm through this process?
Right.
And that is where I feel like I'm very sort of new at that.
Right.
And I think, you talk about like being, your age or my age, it's like I constantly feel like I'm still just trying to figure out, well, what do I really want to do? What do I really want to do?
Right.
Or how do I want to get closer to what I, expressing myself?
Right.
And I feel like I've always just been a late starter, really, with all of that. And actually in coming to the party of realizing, oh, wait, this is really about like, kind of like trying to find out more about myself, express myself, and open myself up. Because I think it's also easy to do this stuff and not show yourself. Like you is doing that.
Right.
By writing something that's very personal.
Right.
But for many years, I've done things that are less personal. There's some aspect of myself that's coming out in them.
Sure.
But I think that's what every filmmaker is kind of working towards, is trying to get kind of closer to like, being in touch with themselves and maybe exposing themselves more.
Not that I want to be the best Ben Stiller fan there is, but for me, like, it is your more dramatic explorations that are so interesting to me. Not that I don't love comedy, but just kind of knowing about, you as a filmmaker, like that's what's most interesting to me. So if you need a vote, you have, my vote, that that kind of exploration, which I know is part of, the work that you do both as a director and an actor, it's incredibly significant, in terms of a body of work as well.
Thank you. No, I mean, I really know, I know that about myself, what I enjoy and what I feel connected to. And actually, at this point in my life, because I haven't really done a lot of acting the last few years. I'm really like trying to look at like, well, how much of why, like, how much do I really want to, like, what's going to make me happy as a creative person?
Oh,
yeah.
It's a perfect time in your life to ask that.
Yeah. And like, because you do something for a very long time, like I do love acting, but honestly, I have to say, like, I really love directing. And so as I'm like trying to figure out, like, well, what do I want to act in? Or I'm like, well, what do I really want to do? And I mean, I could go deep with this, but like, then I'll go to the place of like, oh, well, I love directing, but like, oh, but if you love directing, you're not really challenging yourself. Like you're being too easy on yourself. Do the thing that's like, that's more, scary to you.
Right.
And I think now,
is there a scary element?
Acting, yes, definitely.
Say more.
Well, you're so, the less I've acted over the last few years, the more I've appreciated as a director, working with actors, maybe somehow watching the acting process from the outside and seeing how hard it is. And I guess working with actors who I think are really good and seeing what they put into it.
Are you comparing? Meaning, are you thinking like, I don't do that?
You know
what I mean? Like, is that
well, yes, I'll always watch an actor and go, oh my God, he did that or she did that. It's like, wait, I never thought of like, oh wow, that's a real commitment level. Or I never thought of approaching it that way, or all that. But I also just see how tough the process is, how hard the process is to put yourself out there as an actor. What a strange thing to do.
Right.
What a vulnerable thing. So I don't know, I love directing because I feel like you can appreciate what people are doing, appreciate someone's acting process, try to be helpful to it if they in any way need it.
Sure.
You have an idea of what you see, but then there are all the other elements too. I found myself trying to almost like vibe with the actors when I was directing in a way. That sounds so weird.
No,
but like,
you said you were a late bloomer socially, so this actually is fitting into the
well, like
profile.
just like but like trying to like put myself in some sort of headspace when I'm directing, not just being a guy there, kind of like going like, okay, action or whatever, but like really trying to like be connected with what they're going through because I thought that might help the actual scene itself.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Exactly. But it's sort of like all like a process of like trying to, it's all like figuring it out and like trying stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. I want to bring this full circle before we say goodbye. Because I'm not on social media and I don't go looking for these things, I think that you're relatively private about your kids, which you should be. But just to bring this kind of full circle, I think about you growing up. I don't know why I'm getting emotional about your life. I think about you growing up with your parents and like the set of questions that, I asked you about what that was like. And just thinking about for your kids, they are growing up with parents who are in a completely different era, a completely different awareness and, a completely different culture of sensitivity around parenting. It sounds like your parents did a really lovely job. But I am curious if there's kind of anything that feels particularly interesting or poignant about being a parent, parenting the way that you are.
I mean, I think being a parent is just, it's completely emotional because you're so connected to these kids, you know? I mean, I think about that a lot lately, the level, and it's an interesting question. I don't know if you've ever explored it. Like, why do parents love their children so much? Is it just a biological thing, the protective thing? But the level of love that we have for our kids. And I also think about that in relation to like how we can, as people, expand that love out to, people we don't know and in our lives. But I mean, to watch them become people on their own. I think when you have kids, they all of a sudden just become human beings on their own, that no matter what you're putting into them or what you're trying to do as a parent, they're just going to be who they are too. And it's fascinating to me. And I'm, watching them both. Both of them are very interested. And my daughter is going to drama school. Oh. My son is a senior in high school and he is very interested in acting. Oh. So I'm watching that happen. So I'm watching the apple. And that's a whole other discussion too about where that comes from. Sure. So I have those feelings about nepotism and all those things because
they call themselves nepo babies.
Right. Oh yeah. No, I know. And that's just been around forever. Correct. We just never talked about it like that. It was just called
normal.
Yeah, before there was an article in New York Magazine. I'm just I'm amazed watching them do their thing. I feel both protective, as I saw my parents were with me in different ways about how what they're going to experience going into the creative arts and how that works. But I mean, having both my parents now, passed away, I, seeing in my kids sort of our history and lineage and,
it's powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And, it's very moving to me. The connection that they have with my parents from when what they experienced with them when they were still alive. Yeah. And I feel like that and also that's also a whole other question about like your connection with your parents when they're gone. Yeah. Which is I feel is very becomes almost deeper when your parents aren't there anymore. So yeah, it's all very emotional.
Oh, okay. Last thing. Ben Stiller, do you have a favorite Yiddish word? Did you grow up with Yiddish?
Well, I mean, I grew up with my mother, the Irish Catholic, convert, was very good with the Yiddish word.
Okay. When it's a funny language, so,
I like, there's a bunch, I like tumult.
Oh, look at you.
Well, I like tumult because it's sort of been appropriated as like a word in our language, as a lot of Yiddish words have. I like mishpucha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Just
family.
Like it's fun to say. And then there's like oi gewalt.
But it's just a great expression.
Just like grew up with that. It's shanda. It's a shanda. My
that's
mom's
right.
saying it's a shanda.
It's technically a scandal or a shame.
Yeah,
but
yeah. And then what's the word for pig?
Chazer.
Chazer. Yeah.
A chazer. And the word chazerai, which means pig bits. Chazerai is stuff. It just means stuff,
totally.
but it's literally pig bits.
Yeah.
I'll teach you a Yiddish word before we let you go. Ausgezumt. People created this word during COVID to describe the feeling of being on too many Zoom meetings. Ausgezumt. I swear. My family in Israel introduced this to me. I think we're all ausgezumt. Anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome. This is great.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two.